The news currently dominating the South African airwaves, and something that I've been keeping a close eye on, of course, is Donald Trump calling out South Africa and the ANC for, well, what we all know is true: racial discrimination in South Africa. I've already made a video earlier today on this topic. Since then, someone in the comments asked me, where's the video? Where's the information about the farmer that was murdered just yesterday? Now, I'll be honest with you, it is very difficult to cover farm murders individually here in South Africa on YouTube. I would basically be making a ton of videos every single time, showcasing every single murder that is happening. But I would have to do the same for every other crime that is happening in the country. And as is so often the case, a lot of this stuff doesn't make national news. If you look, for example, at the farmer that was murdered yesterday, Mike Pryor, the only news you find is from local sources. So unless you live in KwaZulu-Natal, in that area, you wouldn't even know that that farm murder just took place. My own family lives in farming communities in the north of the country, and they have farm murders every single year that none of us will ever hear about because, again, the national media in South Africa has a vested interest in ensuring that no one ever finds out. Why? It's not clear. Although I do think there's some argument to be made that there is currently a global attack on white people happening around the world. Now, many people will quote all sorts of conspiracy theories or all sorts of ideas around the white replacement or white displacement theories and stuff like that. There might be truth to that. I'm not entirely sure. I personally think it's a lot easier to understand if you think about what the current powers that be in the world want and what white people are sort of famous for. Now, if you go throughout the world and you look at South America, you look at Africa, you look at Asia, the one thing that all of these regions have in common is a very strong sense of groupthink. The idea in Africa, for example, we call it Ubuntu. The idea that the group is far more important than the individual and that the individual should sacrifice for the group. This is in stark contrast to the one geographical area and the people who live there in the world that do not share this view: Europe. In Europe, at least historically and famously, the ideology has been far more individualistic. The idea in Europe and in the Western world is that a group is merely consisting of individuals, and that the individual within the group is far more important than the group itself. Now, if you're the World Economic Forum or any of these left-wing globalists, this is a problem. Your plan, your vision for the future is a world where there are no individuals, but that the whole world is one big nation, and everyone functions for the betterment of everyone else. A communist utopia, so to speak. The Western way of thinking, the idea that the individual is of extreme importance, that's an issue. That's a big issue for them. Now, there's a way to overcome that issue, and that is by making everyone Christian, because in the Christian faith, we are not important. Christ and God is important. We are meant to be servants of our brothers and our sisters. We are called to serve this world. But of course, that's another problem for the World Economic Forum and the globalist elite, because they don't want to be Christian, because being Christian means that they would have to respect the rights of the individual. They would have to respect things like freedom of speech, freedom of thought, freedom of being. And that's not something they're really interested in. They want all of the control that their globalist, communist, evil thinking gives them, but they don't want the globalist or the global thinking that Christ would bring to the world. And so they're sort of stuck between a rock and a very hard place. But here is the news of the farm murder that happened. Mike Pryor is the man that was murdered. He was abducted at his home, and his burnt remains was found later by the police. The police have not figured out yet what the exact reason was. They think it may have been a disgruntled former employee, but they genuinely don't know. And Mike Pryor's murder is actually, and this might shock a lot of the international viewership, it's actually very tame compared to a lot of the other farm murders that happen in South Africa, where you will oftentimes have women and children raped in front of the father before they murder them in front of the father and then finally kill the father, almost like a display of power. Look at you. You're supposed to protect your household, and yet you'll watch as we destroy it. This is bog standard approach for farm murders in South Africa, which kind of shoots the narrative that, oh, it's just murder in the foot. But of course, in South Africa, you can just ignore certain details that might make it uncomfortable for you to actually push your narrative. But all right, we are talking ultimately about the narrative. So Crispin Peary, or Fury, I don't know how to pronounce his name, but he is the spokesperson for DIRCO. He's been on a bit of a rampage in the last few days, ever since Trump has canceled the Americans visiting South Africa for the G20, basically fighting with every single citizen he can find on X that is pushing, as far as he's concerned, dangerous information. So he takes on Jaco Kleinhans in this one. Really, is this the best you can do? You are invoking Grok bros. Zul Van Dam exposed the confirmation bias that drives Grok. In any event, you should know that AfriForum is part of SAPS processes to verify substats on incidents of crime in rural communities. You are playing to the gallery as usual. Now, it should be mentioned just here that what Zul Van Dam did was she basically argued Grok into agreeing with her. If you had any knowledge and actual education on how AI language models are built, you would know that that's literally in their programming. If you argue with an AI enough, if you continue to disagree with the AI, it will eventually just agree with you. This is why I put no stock into these guys that say, I got AI to agree with me that Jesus did rise from the dead. Jesus did rise from the dead, and we have actual historical evidence of that. But when they say stuff like this, it's like, well, yeah, because it's programmed to. It's not going to keep arguing with you. If it knows that you're looking for a specific answer, it will eventually just give you that answer. That's one of the problems within the AI landscape. And you can get AI to literally agree with you on everything. I've even had the AI, I've seen the AI at least, agree that the Holocaust wasn't real, because it's ultimately what it is programmed to do. Of course, Jaco Kleinhans here was simply calling out Ronald Lamola on the lies of him claiming that there is no persecution or genocide happening in South Africa of the white population at all. Now, Ronald Lamola does this interesting thing here where he actually quotes some numbers, and these numbers are incredibly helpful. You see, because the numbers he gives is that in the last 4 years, from 2020 to 2024, and it should be mentioned that even the police have admitted that their data isn't incredibly reliant. In the Matlanga Commission, we have now found out, without a shadow of a doubt, that most of the systems that should exist for the police to track stats doesn't even work. Most of those systems aren't even implemented in most of the police stations throughout the country. And in the police stations where they are implemented, it's been so long that they've been sat doing nothing that most of the stuff is broken. It's no longer even functioning. So you can't even trust the police's official statistics. But Ronald Lamola's statistics will go off of that. He says that in the last 4 years, 101 workers of farmers have been murdered in farm attacks. This is compared to the 53 victims that were farm owners, who are mostly white. Well, I'm glad Mr. Ronald Lamola gave us the official stats. So how does that play out on a per capita basis? How many farmers are there in South Africa? 32,000. That's the number, of which most of them are white. 32,000. You might say, well, 53 compared to 32,000 doesn't sound that bad. Well, how many farm workers are there in South Africa? Well, that would come out to a staggering 903,000 to 983,000. They're not entirely sure because some of these workers aren't exactly registered, but that's the official number, 900,000. So almost 1 million farm workers in South Africa versus 32,000 farm owners or farmers. If you do the per capita here, you realize that the farmers far outstrip the farm workers. So on a per capita basis, the 53 farmers that were murdered represents about a 0.2% of the total farming population of South Africa. The workers, 0.01% of all of the farm workers. You will note that 32,000 goes into 980,000 about 30 times. So, for this to make any sort of sense, to make the argument that it is a crime problem and not a targeted problem, one would have to see farm workers murdered at 30 times the rate that they currently are. This would put it at about 3,000 farm workers that should be murdered between 2020 and 2024 if you wanted to just make the argument that it's just people who live in rural areas who are murdered. That's just how it works. So the numbers don't check out. And there's no world in which these numbers check out. But of course, for the ANC, for people like Crispin and Fury, it doesn't matter that these numbers don't check out because it's far easier to deny reality than what it could ever be to actually confront it. And that, to me, is the big reason why I believe that there is a genocide happening. If the ANC weren't interested in systematically killing off and eradicating the white population of South Africa, they would have no problem in admitting that there is a white genocide happening on the farms of South Africa, or at the very least, that there is a serious crime problem in farming communities, specifically targeting farmers, and then would actually take steps to position the police in such a way that there are units that fight these crimes. It should also be noted that everyone touts farm murders, and the number of farm murders have actually come down since the first 2 decades of ANC rule. What no one actually seems to mention is that it's not because there are fewer incidents of farm attacks. It's that farmers have gotten a lot better at organizing so that they don't die. You now have actual neighborhood watches for farmers, where farmers will spend their entire day working and at night drive around from farm to farm in different segments to be able to respond when a farm attack is actually happening. And oftentimes the farmer that is being attacked just needs to survive long enough for the other farmers to actually arrive. You now have farmers with actual radios that they can communicate with one another because cell phone coverage is so spotty in those areas. Fundamentally, the crime statistics have come down, but it's because of what they've done, as is so often the case here in South Africa. Every failure of the ANC is another opportunity for us to basically do it ourselves, because what else are you going to do? The point is, if you have a government where there is a clear crime problem in this country targeting a very specific segment of the demographic reality of this country, and you are more interested in pretending like that isn't happening than you're actually interested in stopping that from happening, something is going on. And I'm sorry, but that's just crime doesn't cut it. It is crime, but it's a kind of crime that you like. You want white farmers to be afraid. You want white farmers to move out of the farming communities and into the cities where you can control them and where you can continue to take their land for yourself. That is ultimately the reality of what is happening in South Africa, and it is evil. As always, ladies and gentlemen, let me know in the comment section down below. Help me spread this message by hitting the like button, hitting that subscribe button, and sharing this video with as many people as you can. Then a massive shout out and thank you to all of the patrons, YouTube channel members. To become a patron, link in the description down below. YouTube members, join button right below this video. As always, be good to each other, be kind to each other, and I will see all of you in the next one. Peace.